welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. You know where you can get the podcast. Today on the show, we are going to have a two-part show. First, I have on Blake Murphy from over at Raptors Republic. He works at The Athletic, writes for Vice Sports, does a wide variety of things to talk about the Serge Ibaka trade. The second part is going to be talking college hoops with my good buddy out here in Los Angeles, Aaron Torres. But first, the big news of the day, Serge Ibaka for Terrence Ross and the lesser of Toronto's 2 first-round picks, probably going to be a pick in the 25-ish range, I would say. Blake, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am excellent. It's always good to get you on the horn. I think Blake's one of the smarter guys that you'll talk to around just generally the NBA. Really fun, really intelligent writer that I enjoy talking to every time I get a chance to. So how is life for you right now? Did you finally, it's Valentine's Day, did you finally find your Raptors Valentine?
Yeah, this is great. It's been more so than even the addition. It's been it's been like 6 weeks of people panicking and people, in the mentions and in our comments just going nuts looking for some sort of change, to the point that even Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan have been, openly asking for help. So it's nice to finally get that. It's nice to get some easy, exciting content right before the All-Star break. It's nice that they've given us this window here where we still have 10 days to speculate on other moves they might make. And also, Serge Ibaka is really good.
Yes, I think that is an underrated aspect of this. Serge Ibaka is really good. Another thing about Serge Ibaka that's really good, Serge Ibaka's name, his full name, Serge Balou Lamu Sayonga Loom Wahalis Jonas Hugo Ibaka.
Yeah, I'm just going to call him Serge.
Yeah, I think that's probably what he enjoys most. So what is your initial impression of this trade beyond Serge Ibaka just being a really good player and actually providing value for them?
Yeah, the Raptors have been in the market for a power forward upgrade for a long time now, basically since Chris Bosh left. It's been an open secret. I'm a huge Patrick Patterson fan. I love what he brings at the defensive end of the floor, and his absence has been felt a ton during this bad stretch the Raptors have been going through. But if Patterson could be your sixth man instead, and you can use him if you can use him alongside a guy like Ibaka and stuff, that only stands to help your depth. The front court was kind of thinned out, where you have two young centers who are producing, but they're not. Jonas Valanciunas had a nice playoffs last year. Lucas Nogueira is untested in the postseason. None of the power forward options they have outside of Patrick Patterson were very intriguing. So this fills a big hole that they've had for a long time. He's a nice fit on both ends of the floor, and I think what they're probably looking at is not necessarily that Ibaka makes them who they want to be this year. He certainly helps in that regard. But acquiring Ibaka's bird rights, even though it's going to come with some real questions in the offseason when Kyle Lowry, Patrick Patterson, and Serge Ibaka are all free agents, the Raptors had no path to cap space to improve this team in the coming offseason beyond what would have been the mid-level exception and 2 late first-round picks. So what they've done now is they've set themselves up in a position where not only are they now better for the rest of this season, but they are potentially better next year and through the end of the competitive window with DeRozan, who's 27, and Lowry, who will be 31. You can quibble with the fits or what the price tags might be, but a trade was always going to be the clearest path to them improving their kind of 2 to 3 year window. And I think this does this. I like the price that they gave up. I'm a bigger Terrence Ross fan than I think most Raptors fans are. I think they're going to miss his shooting, and I think he's going to be a nice fit in Orlando and be given a good opportunity. And then in terms of the pick, it's a great draft, which I'm sure you've talked about lots on this podcast. But for the Raptors, who already have 8 players 25 or younger on the roster and 2 picks in this coming draft, that was going to be a draft and stash pick anyway, probably, and they kept the better of those 2 picks. So all around, I know there are some concerns about it longer term. I know that Ibaka, he's probably going to get paid more than he's worth in a vacuum this offseason. I know he's declined a little bit, but this was the Raptors' best path to getting better this year and for the foreseeable future. I like the deal. I like what they gave up. I like Ibaka's fit.
So, yeah, here's what I will say. Everything you just said is right, and I totally think this was their best possible move, was acquiring Serge Ibaka, right? Like, I think that getting him was the best thing, given that Paul Millsap seems to be off of the market. I think this was probably their best move. I'm a little bit concerned about his fit in general with this team. You look at him, I think he's better as a 5 right now than as a 4, to be honest. Like, just the way he moves now. The knee injury, it seems like has sapped a little bit of his athleticism. You look at his block rate, it's declined every year since, I believe, even 2012. It's all the way down to 4.3%. And this was a guy that at one point was known as the premier shot blocker in the NBA. The reputation, I think, kind of exceeds what his actual value is defensively. And I think that's going to be exacerbated by playing the 4. I don't think he moves terribly well. Having him and Jonas Valanciunas on the floor, I think, is going to be a problem in terms of mobility. And honestly, when they end up at the end of game scenarios that I think they were hoping to acquire Ibaka for, I think it's going to be Ibaka at the 5 and Patrick Patterson at the 4, which means Ibaka is going to be providing a lot of value. But I just wonder if they couldn't have held off a little bit longer and not ended up trading Ross, because I kind of agree with you in that I don't love Terrence Ross, but I like him, and he'd been a solid like 6th, 7th man for them this year. Like, this feels like patching a more important hole. Like, they're starting 4 and a guy who they can play small with at the 5. That's definitely a way bigger hole than the 6th, 7th man. But it does open up a hole there, and I don't think that should be ignored either.
No, I'm with you. And in terms of, let me just touch on the Ibaka, what position he's going to play point first, because you're right. I absolutely, before the season when the Raptors were reportedly interested in Ibaka, I loved it as, he could start at the 4 and be your backup 5, which they eventually signed Sullinger for. Lucas Nogueira has been better than even I expected, and I'm a big Nogueira fan. So maybe that need's not there as much, but I agree with you. I tweeted out a lineup earlier. I think Lowry, DeRozan, 1-2, either Powell or Carroll, or maybe Corey Joseph, depending on the opponent, and then Patterson Ibaka is probably going to be your best two-way closing lineup. I like what Ibaka brings at the center position. I think his rim protection plays up more a little bit there. And I think part of the reason, I agree with you that qualitatively his defense is not where it was a couple years ago when he was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I think he's a three-time All-Defense. But part of that is that he switched from playing more center to playing more power forward. And so I think, the times that he does slide over to center, maybe they'll get a little more out of him. But yeah, sorry, I totally diverged from what your initial question was. Oh, Terrence Ross's loss. So the thing with Ross, I think, is that you look at what the Raptors have right now in terms of assets, and we've kind of seen over the last couple weeks that DeMar DeRozan is a better and more important player in a vacuum than Patrick Patterson, but the kind of trickle-down effect is greater at the power forward position given how thin they were. And I think the same will be said with Terrence Ross, where Norman Powell isn't going to provide that shooting that Terrence Ross does, and that's huge. DeMarre Carroll's now their only wing shooter, but Norman Powell is a good player who can step into Terrence Ross's minutes at least, and they didn't have that guy in Ibaka's spot before. And if you look at the trade market a little bit, you can't assume they're going to be able to make another deal, but they do have some prospects on their team. They have all of their own first and second round picks moving forward. And then they have Jared Sullinger's salary that they can use for salary matching. So from here over the next 10 days, I would guess the goal is probably to replace the Terrence Ross position, maybe a shooter off the bench, maybe someone who's not going to take his minutes in the rotation, but someone who can come in off the bench and score or shoot a little bit. That's easier said than done, but I think they looked at this and, the Ross spot is maybe easier to fill with what they have internally and what they could potentially get than this Ibaka hole that they've had for years.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One trade that I threw out there on Twitter really quickly to Ben Rosales, who does some Lakers stuff, was like Nick Young for maybe the Sullinger matching money, Fred VanVleet, and like a second rounder. Because they could use a backup point guard that's developable, and the Sullinger money is the Sullinger money, and a second rounder is a second rounder. That wouldn't be a bad deal to me. Look,
man, no one would be happier to have Nick Young in Toronto than I would. I have so much fun talking to that guy whenever he comes here. It'd be great. I don't know if they pull the trigger given Nick Young's. I know Nick Young's been great this year, and he's played better on the defensive end. He's been a much better, team first guy and stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure they'd roll the dice on someone who has been Nick Young in the past. But you know what? They probably have a good insight into whether he's a fit, because Jesse Mermis, who was in the Raptors organization for a couple years, is now one of Luke Walton's assistants.
Yep.
And when I caught up with Mermis when the Lakers were here, he spoke the world of how Nick Young's been this year. So maybe, I know a lot of Raptors fans like PJ Tucker from the Suns. Last we heard, PJ Tucker, the Suns wanted a first for him. Maybe you could get them down to a second. I guess the issue there would be that the Raptors' second figures to be in the 50s, so not a ton of value. but maybe throw a prospect their way. There are a couple names like that out there. I don't know if, I've seen some people ask about Wilson Chandler. I'm not sure they can shoot that high with the assets that they have left, but there are a couple names. I don't mind Nick Young as an option, mostly because I'd have a blast with it.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to stay cheap here, I think. This is a
course.
team that wants to continue to have assets going forward into the future so that, if things break wrong this year and, Kyle Lowry leaves and they're stuck with DeMar DeRozan and, maybe building around a DeRozan, Serge Ibaka core, you want to be able to, complement those guys with younger players and get better quickly. Yeah. Exactly. One other note that I kind of had on this trade, it was a very secondary thought, but this team now, to me at least, has a lot of shoot-first guys around Kyle Lowry. DeMar DeRozan, I think he's an underrated passer. I think he doesn't really get enough credit for that. But I do think that he's obviously a shoot-first guy that's going to be looking for his own shot. Patrick Patterson, not a great passer. Serge Ibaka has always been a really poor ball mover, to be honest. Even in pick and rolls, he never hits that, kick out that's wide open. He always goes up for the contested look.
You don't like that 3.5% career assist rate?
Yeah, I know. It's not great. I worry that this team is just going to become even more isolation dependent going forward. And, maybe this is an ill-fitting concern, but I think that isolation teams, they're often seen as being better in the playoffs, but a team that is isolation dependent that can also make plays with the pass, I think, is the best way to succeed in the playoffs. And I wonder if they have that secondary passing with this current roster construction, really.
Yeah, that's a fair concern. And what you want, what they've learned that you want around Lowry and DeRozan over the last couple of years is you want guys who can either knock down that three-point shot or attack the closeout and make the next pass. And Patrick Patterson's improved a little bit attacking those closeouts and putting the ball on the floor. Like you said, still not great. DeMarre Carroll's a guy who, even though his play has been up and down, when he's on the floor, he helps in that regard. Mm-hmm. Norman Powell is mostly an attacker. So I see your concerns with that for sure. The one thing I'm encouraged about with Ibaka and his potential role in the offense, assuming he's willing to embrace, a smaller role than what he's been playing in Orlando, is the fact that he's shooting almost 39% on threes this year, and they're almost all above the break. So something the Raptors have run into in the past with their 4s and 5s is their 5s, Jonas Valanciunas is improving as a passer, but really isn't a big threat in those 4-on-3 situations. Lucas Nogueira's been good there. And then their power forwards, Patterson can pick and pop, but Sullinger can't. Siakam can't. When they go small, the screen quality isn't there. But Ibaka's going to be maybe their best pick and pop threat, and they run a lot of dual screen action to set up those isolations. So I think he'll be helpful there. I think they're going to, I don't think they're going to hand him the ball a ton. He hasn't worked a ton in the post this year anyway. But I don't see Ibaka's role being big enough where it detracts from what the Raptors are trying to do. But part of this might just be me trying to be optimistic because Ibaka is just more talented than anyone else the Raptors have had in that role anyway. So, even if the fit's not quite as good, the fact that Ibaka is just a better player than the guys they've been running out there, part of this depends on Ibaka being okay with that 21% usage coming back down to the 17-18 it was at in Oklahoma City. Yeah. I'm hopeful they can figure out the fit. They only have 27 games to figure it out, which is, he's not going to play tonight, so 25, 26 games. That's a little concerning, but I could see it working. DeRozan might have to make some sacrifice here and there. His 34% usage or whatever it is needs to come down a little bit anyway. So I don't know. I think it can work with the talent that they have there, but I don't disagree that the pieces kind of fit clunky on offense. Yeah,
and let me be clear on this again. Like I said at the top, I think this was probably their best option. And going forward here, we'll look into the future a little bit. This is a team that does need to show some success in the playoffs this year because Kyle Lowry is a free agent. You could tangibly see him leaving. Serge Ibaka is going to be a free agent. This team is really going to have to go for it. And there's a little bit I guess there are some signs there that Cleveland could be a little bit weaker than what we've seen so far. Kevin Love is going to miss 6 weeks with a knee injury. Who knows what J.R. Smith is going to be like when he gets back from injury. Teams with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving are always going to be difficult to beat in the playoffs, but there's at least a sign that the door could be, cracked, maybe just a little bit open for someone to get up in there and at least make a run toward a finals appearance.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think, before that point, the Raptors had fallen off so far from being Cleveland's perceived number one threat to, being a team that could be first-round playoff fodder. The margin for error there wasn't very big, and I think their margin gets a little larger now because they're a better team. But yeah, you look at Cleveland, and if one of those guys is out, if maybe two of them's out, maybe the window's open. Obviously, Toronto can't look ahead like that because Boston's playing really well. Washington's playing unbelievably well.
Yep.
I think Toronto matches up well with those teams just fine, but they have to get there first. But if you look ahead to a Cleveland matchup, yeah, Ibaka helps. We talked about Ibaka playing small at the 5. That Patterson-Ibaka frontcourt might be your best option against a healthy Cleveland team, because the Raptors have really struggled with the Loves and Fries in the past, and I think it would help in that regard. And then you mentioned Lowry, and yeah, this is kind of an unspoken specter that hangs over things, is that Lowry is maybe in the middle of the best run any individual has had in franchise history, and it's assumed, I think, because DeRozan stayed, that Lowry's no question to stay either. But Lowry values winning so highly, and Lowry is still, a little fickle at times, that a first-round exit this year or a performance in the playoffs that he's not confident this team can take the next step, that might cost you him. And then you mentioned the possibility of building around a DeRozan-Ibaka core. I don't think you want any part of that. So part of this is... part of this is getting a good player to help now and help in the future, but part of it is also just making sure you get to that future where Lowry stays, and I think they have to at least win a playoff series to get there. So, I'm trying not to look ahead to a potential Cleveland matchup, also because that matchup might end up coming in the second round if Boston can jump Cleveland, which is, that would be the most Raptors thing, to make this edition improve over the stretch run and then get LeBron in the second round instead. But yeah, the Cleveland window's there. I think anyone in the East is fooling themselves if they look further ahead than just getting to the conference finals. But Ibaka would definitely help in that regard.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to talk about Toronto here is, are you concerned about just the amount of salary that Toronto is going to be just purely on the hook for? I mean, if Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka both stay, and I think it's worth noting here that I would be surprised if Serge Ibaka would leave Toronto if this team has success. I mean, he has a history with Masai Ujiri, the GM in Toronto. Like, this is the kind of situation where you could always see him really thriving and really deciding to stay. So they're going to be on the hook for like $130, $140 million if Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka both get paid what they likely will get paid this offseason. Like, that's going to require all sorts of like tangential moves around the roster to make this salary structure work around DeRozan, Lowry, and Ibaka.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and that's part of the reason that I'm okay with them giving up Terrence Ross, is that if you look ahead to the offseason, Terrence Ross, he's a good player and he's on a good deal, but that's $10 million that you've shed from the payroll that you're probably going to have to shed this offseason anyway. So in terms of long-term asset management, I still think, I think if they were to re-sign Ibaka and Lowry, that spells the end of Patterson. I can't imagine there's a scenario where they can afford all three of those guys at even, 80% of market. You might even see a scenario where Corey Joseph has to be outbound too. He makes $7.5 million, can opt out after next season. So maybe he's outbound to lower the luxury tax bill. But I think what they're going to do is, you hope that, look, DeMar DeRozan signed for 91% of the max. Even if Lowry signed for 91% of the max, that is still an obscene contract. But you have to hope that this team finds a quick chemistry. Those three guys mesh together well. They have some playoff success. And then, you lean on the fact that the city is a good place to play, that Ibaka reportedly likes, that Ujiri has a relationship with Ibaka. I can't repeat the exact quote, but during the offseason, Masai Ujiri had media availability, and he was asked about the Ibaka non-deal, and this is when he let slip what the original asking price from Oklahoma City was, and he certainly gave the impression that he was confident that, Serge Ibaka would be an option for them at some point in the future. So, I think they'd be confident they can keep him. But yeah, there are some cap gymnastics here. MLSE has deep pockets, and Masai Ujiri has said in the past he's got the green light to go into the tax, but they're not going to go into like Cleveland levels of tax unless they see a path to legitimately contending for a title. So tough decisions will have to be made. I think you hope that maybe you can get Lowry and Ibaka for a combined, say, $60 million, which might be too optimistic, and then Patterson's gone, and then you reevaluate from there. This is the one benefit of having so many young guys on the team. People get frustrated with it sometimes, but at least it's they're inexpensive pieces at the end of the roster to build with. So complicated decisions for sure, but I think they'll be happy to be making those decisions if it means that they've made the second or third round of the playoffs again.
Yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about here is just Orlando's side of this deal. Orlando, they have not been run well over the last 2 years.
Not great.
There's not really a way to sugarcoat that. The Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis, and Ersan Ilyasova for Serge Ibaka deal, that was a really bad trade. That was atrocious. They got absolutely zero value for what they should have had. You throw in basically, moving Tobias Harris for nothing that's on their roster now, moving Mo Harkless for a top 55 protected pick. Like, this has not been a well-run organization. I think Rob Hennigan's going to be a good GM sometime in the future. He's not shown that ability yet. Having said that, I think they did as well as they possibly could have when offloading Serge Ibaka with 4 months left on his contract here, getting Terrence Ross in a first-round pick.
Yeah, look, when it was first reported that the Raptors had interest in Ibaka and that the Magic might be open to moving him, one of the first points that I made was any Ibaka deal is going to hinge on Hennigan not, employing the sunk cost fallacy here. He was not going to be able to look at what he gave up for Ibaka and use that as his anchor point in negotiations. And to his credit, he wrote that off as a sunk cost and moved forward and got the best deal he could. When it comes job evaluation time, all those things you just laid out, I still can't get over them giving away Mo Harkless for nothing. And the Harris deal to clear the money to sign Jeff Green for 1 year, and there have been weird things. But you're right. I think this is, Zach Lowe tweeted that the market was cooler than most expected for Serge Ibaka, which heading into an offseason where you're going to have to pay him, and he's 27, and he isn't, an elite talent. He's a good second-tier guy. I understand that. So in Ross, the Magic get a guy who has shown really good flashes, and not to harp on the fact that he scored 51 points in a game before, but he scored 51 points in a game before. He just turned 26. He had, early in the year, shown some nice growth in terms of offensive consistency, getting a little more aggressive, getting to the line a little bit more. He's kind of regressed a little bit since then and is shooting, quote unquote, only 37% on threes, which is fairly low by his recent standards. But there's a nice piece here, and I think he could grow into a larger role. The Magic are going to have to figure out a way to get him to be consistent on the defensive end, because that's always been an issue with him, is he can, sometimes he looks like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and other times he looks like DeMar DeRozan. So though there will probably be some frustration, some growing pain there, but this is a guy who I think can come in and, not to shoot too high, but I think he might average 15 points a game the rest of the year for the Magic, and they'll get a good long look at what he can contribute on the wings there. They really need shooting. And then he's got 2 affordable years left after this. So he'll be, he can either be an affordable building piece or a trade chip for another deal. And then, the pick, better than I do the quality of the draft, but even a late pick in the 25 to 30 range, that's an inexpensive flyer you can take on a guy. And if you're the Magic, that's kind of what you need if you're going to push this timeline back.
Yeah, look, I think that what a lot of people get frustrated with Terrence Ross is that he's so athletic and he can shoot, so he should be more than he is. I think that they fall into the fallacy of expectations being too high for him. My thing with him is that this guy is a league average wing on a $10 million a year contract. Do you know how valuable that is around the league right now? There are so few wings that you can throw out there who can space the floor and provide athleticism. That is not an easy thing for teams to find right now in the NBA. Getting him to me on that deal in an era where, you're going to see these guys get paid $13, $14, $15 million a year probably, that is an exceptional value for 2 more years past this one. I really like that pickup by Orlando, regardless of, maybe he is a little bit disappointing, but it doesn't matter. Whenever you're getting just what he is right now, that is surplus value based on his contract.
Yeah, for sure. And you want to talk about what guys are getting. Look at what Mo Harkless, a guy they gave away, got in free agency. Ross's deal is going to look, I thought it looked good at the time. I'm a proponent generally of waiting out a guy in RFA, but the Raptors jumped a year early, and it looked pretty good at the time. It looked great by the end of last offseason. I think it's going to look even better again after this offseason with the cap going up one more time. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. I like Ross as a player. I like Ross as a dude, and I like him as an asset for the Magic.
Yeah, and I mean, the draft pick, like you said, the draft pick is probably going to be later on. I mean, right now it looks like it's going to be the number 25 overall pick. That'll give them 2 first-round picks, though, in a very asset-rich draft. That's going to have value. Ross gives them shooting, which they desperately need. I'm a fan of this deal for them. I think that they did as well as humanly possible. And, you know, some people are going to think it's impossible to throw away the fact that they dumped Victor Oladipo for this, but whatever. It is what it is.
I mean,
you just have to consider it a sunk cost at that stage.
Yeah, if you're evaluating Hennigan and the Magic's overall, their overall building process, yeah, those 2 deals look terrible next to each other. But if you just look at the Magic are not headed to the playoffs, they have this 27-year-old pending free agent who doesn't necessarily fit longer term with them, I think they did pretty well.
Yep, me too. Well, Blake, do you have anything else that you want to throw at us?
I don't. I think we covered it. I'm happy about this deal. I love that it happened 10 days before the deadline. I love that it happened. I was like just about to sit down to watch something, and then my phone started blowing up with Woj alerts. And I don't know, this stuff, I love this stuff. It's so exciting. I love when things happen, not on the deadline or not on draft night. Those days are awesome on their own. Yep. But getting this kind of burst in the middle of a Tuesday, it's so much fun. It makes doing this job so much more enjoyable. And I don't know, I love days like this. Thank you, Masai, for giving me something to do on my Tuesday.
Tell them where you can find your work, Blake.
They can find it at Raptors Republic. That's where you'll find a fairly lengthy breakdown of the Serge Ibaka deal that I did. Vice Sports, The Athletic Toronto, all over the place. On Twitter at Blake Murphy ODC.
Yeah, Blake's a great follow. I would suggest following Blake. He writes in a variety of places, so you're going to want to follow that if you want to make sure and get his work. He does a great job covering the Raptors, covering the league as a whole. This is going to be the first part of the show. The second part is with Aaron Torres, and that'll start right now. Hey, Aaron, how is it going?
It is going well, Sam. Happy Valentine's Day to you and your beloved. I know you're busy this evening with your lovely lady, so I appreciate you squeezing in a few minutes to talk with me about some hoops. Yeah,
I had to get it done like at 5:15, just clocked out early and then, started cooking a little bit. I found this goofy recipe online with they're like shrimp scampi stuffed crab shell, or not crab shells, but like stiff pasta shells.
Wow.
Where you just cook the pasta and then cook the shrimp scampi, put cheese on top of them, stuff the shells, and then, throw them in the oven and go from there. So we're going to try that. We're going to see how it goes. Ended up buying some cake. I can do dessert typically, but it was too much of a hassle. Went out and bought the cake from a place that we really like out here in Los Angeles. But you said that you don't have anything to do for Valentine's Day because your girl is studying. So, you should be thankful.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, usually when you say you don't have anything to do with Valentine's Day, it's because you're single, which is either awesome because you're single by choice or just depressing because you're not single by choice, right? But I am in the very rare circumstance where I am in a fully committed relationship, lovely girlfriend, but she is finishing up her master's right now. She's in her 3rd year, I believe, so she's really coming down to the wire and doing things educationally that frankly I never did. I went to ho-hum UConn, got my bachelor's, and never looked back. But so with that being said, she is busy, hard at work, being the brains of the operation in our relationship, which means that I basically get to do nothing on Valentine's Day. As I told you off air, I even asked her, assuming that it was my responsibility to make a dinner reservation or, pull the Sanfazzini and cook at home, do something nice. And she said, honey, you're the best, but I probably will not see you on Tuesday night. And I played the woe is me card. I did the double check. Are you sure? Are you sure that's what you? And then of course she said yeah. And so now I'm sitting here watching Wake Forest, Clemson, and Notre Dame, Boston College. And listen, I got my feet up, And I will say this has been one of the best Valentine's Days I can ever remember, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, my God. Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Wake Forest and Clemson. The first place I wanted to start is the ACC. Title race there is pretty crazy. I mean, tonight's basketball games are even crazy. Like, Boston College is up 6 in the second half against Notre Dame as we record this. Clemson's up 20 against Wake Forest. You know, Virginia Tech is losing to Pitt. Like, this league just continues to be, I think it's the deepest league that has ever existed in college basketball, and that includes your old Big East while you were at UConn.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sam. And it's funny because obviously, like, I was there in the heyday. I may have missed the 11-bid league, but I mean, I was there, you know, when it was the superpower that it was, you know, 9, 10, 11 teams every year in the conversation. And I will be honest, there were always some dregs in the Big East. There were always some games that you could always, you know, check off in the win column. At the time, you know, I can't remember now, it was probably Providence College, it was Seton Hall, it was South Florida. And it is amazing with the ACC, you know, I think it was Coach K said it just within the last day or two, is that this is the most balanced the ACC he's ever seen it, and I think we're seeing it right now. And when I say right now, I mean literally right now. That Boston College team, you know, a few weeks ago they almost beat North Carolina, who's obviously in the driver's seat right now in the ACC, and they're at the bottom of the division. Pitt a few weeks ago looked like they were a pushover. All of a sudden they beat Syracuse. And so I'm with you, dude. I can honestly say that even as an old school Big East guy, I have never seen a conference from top to bottom every single night. It doesn't matter if it's 1 versus 15. You just never know what you're going to get, and literally anybody can beat anybody.
Yeah, it's a really just wild year where, yeah, it's really deep, but like if you had to say, would any of your top 5 title favorites come out of the ACC right now either?
No, actually that's a really good point, and it's funny because, you know, you and I both do all sorts of, you know, radio interview and podcast interviews over the course of the season, and, you know, somebody asked me not too long ago, you know, we were talking about the depth of the ACC, and they said, well, how many national championship contenders are there in the ACC? And what I said was, and it's something that I think the casual college basketball fan kind of overlooks, is that there's a major difference between a team that's good enough to make a Final Four and then a team that's good enough to win 2 more games at the Final Four and win a national championship. And when I look at, like, legitimate national championship contenders, and I'm with you, I wouldn't put any of these in my favorites, but even just to win it all, I would probably say right now North Carolina, maybe Louisville, although even Louisville, as we saw again with Syracuse last night, is a wildly inconsistent team, not only from game to game but half to half. And then we got to see what Duke is down the stretch. And really beyond that, I think that any of those other teams, as good as they are and as tough as they are on any given night, are necessarily a team that can win 6 in a row. I think it's a great point by you. It's a weird league in that it's balanced. There's all kinds of talent. But in terms of the upper echelon, you know, maybe North Carolina, and then after that it's kind of slim pickings.
Yeah, I think that I would put Louisville in my top 5 right now, which is weird because
in your top 5, okay.
They are like a highly inconsistent team, like you mentioned. Like they, from night to night, you can never be certain what you're getting offensively from that group. I mean, Donovan Mitchell has really stepped up over the course of the last, like, maybe 3 weeks or so and become the kind of elite college basketball player that his athleticism and skill level kind of portends that he can be. But beyond him, I mean, you're still talking about a kid in Deng Adele who's, you know, an average shooter, if not just a terrific basketball player doing everything else, but the average shooting doesn't help. All of their bigs, Jalen Johnson, Mango Mathiang, Ray Spalding, and Anas Mahmoud, none of those guys can get their own shot, really, I don't think. Mathiang sometimes, but not really. Quentin Snyder is really the only offense-first guy there, depending on what you want to call freshman VJ King, who is kind of playing a limited role, but a really interesting one in the way that he's just able to switch everything defensively and play in a wide variety of defenses at a high level and play multiple spots in all of those defenses at a high level. So I really like this team defensively more than I like them offensively. They are, for my money, the best defense in the country. I mean, I think South Carolina's ahead of them in terms of the numbers, but just in the way that they can attack you in so many different ways and take so many different teams out of their element, as long as, you know, play Virginia, who continues to randomly just have their number. I think that they can really cause problems for everyone in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I don't disagree on that. And I think, maybe because they just weren't in it last year, I think the one thing, too, that we forget about that just program as a whole and their coach as a whole is that, say what you want about Rick Pitino, and obviously with all the off-the-court stuff, he has become a little bit of a media punching bag. But that dude, I don't think there's a guy in college basketball. Yeah, exactly. I said it on Twitter a few weeks ago, and I think even the Big Blue Nation was okay with the sentiment, is that, like, there isn't a guy that you just give him a bunch of dudes at the beginning of the year and you look at them and you don't really have any idea how they're going to fit together or what the pieces are or what's going to work or who's going to come out of where. And every year by mid-February, by late February, this time of year, he gets it rolling. And I think the other thing, too, that not even just from an offensive, defensive standpoint, I totally agree with you on the defensive side, on your comments on the defense, is like, they are, and I mentioned to somebody the other day, is like, they're kind of a mini Duke in terms of, like, they just haven't had their guys for the most part all year. I mean, Quentin Snyder was hot, and then he gets injured. I think, Tony Hicks has had an injury throughout the year. They just had the suspensions, Deng Adele and Matt Dieng for just that one game. But it's like every time they get some momentum, there's another hiccup. And I say that as if it should be a negative. But as we kind of have this conversation, they're 21-5. And to your point, I think they're every bit a team that's good enough to win the national championship. And to me, I just think they're a team that not only do they play good defense, but I think they're going to continue to get better over the course of the next 6 weeks or so, just as they get more comfortable playing with each other, which is something you wouldn't normally think to say this time of year, but for them, I feel like it's applicable.
Yeah, I mean, just look at Rick Pitino's results. I mean, he got them to the Final Four in 2005, but from 2008 going forward, it's Elite Eight. They lose in the first round 2 times in a row, but then Final Four, title, Sweet 16, Elite Eight before the ineligible year last year. Like, this dude gets it done in the NCAA tournament. He knows exactly how to exploit your worst matchups and make a game your absolute worst nightmare every single night out there. He's a hell of a coach, even though, like you said, he has his restaurant proclivities off the floor.
Yeah, or at least his players and assistant coaches do. But he's brilliant. And I know the conversation has kind of been bandied about, recently as far as what would have happened if he had never left Kentucky. Where would they be? I don't know about all that stuff. But what I was going to say was, I mean, even if you go back to those Kentucky years, and I have a couple of buddies who kind of played in that era. We think of Kentucky now as one and done, and they're getting every single kind of key recruit that they want. Even dating back to those Rick Pitino years, it was a lot of 4-year players, and I understand, of course, that 4-year players were more common back then, but, a lot of their biggest contributors weren't guys that went on to play, at the NBA level, and I think it's just continued at Louisville. He's just got a real keen eye for talent. I mean, there's so many guys, even just in his time at Louisville, that you looked at him as freshmen and said, how is that guy ever going to see the court? I'm thinking Gorgie Deng off the top of my head, but there's been other guys just like him, and it is incredible. And like I said, and I think you just hit on it as well. So much of the off the court stuff kind of gets overshadows the fact that this guy is a really, really, really good coach. I would definitely second your sentiment that they're a team good enough to win the national championship. I don't know if I'd have them in the top 5, but I think, as you said, the way they play defense, and as I said, kind of the way they're going to get better over the next 6 weeks, I think they're a team that's going to scare a lot of people if they end up in their side of the bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. And, how would you handicap this ACC race right now? North Carolina is the only team with 3 losses. Louisville, Florida State, Virginia, Duke with 4 losses. Notre Dame, as we talk, has 5 losses, but I don't really think that they're in this conversation in terms of teams that can potentially win an ACC championship. So where do you sit right now in terms of where this race is?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I haven't totally broken down the schedule and how everything matches up. I mean, I think obviously the most interesting team in the race is Duke. As you know from, following me on social media.
I don't know. Is Duke back?
Well, look, they listen, in the defense of a Duke fan, they won 5 in a row. What I would argue as a counter is that the Pitt game at home, when Pitt was in last place in the ACC, it was a 4-point game with under 2 minutes to go. Notre Dame has completely fallen off a cliff since Duke beat them. Wake Forest, they basically needed a buzzer beater from Luke Kennard. But I say all this to say, are they back, are they not back? I don't know. But I still need to see a little bit more from them, probably, frankly, starting tomorrow with the game against Virginia, before I'm ready to proclaim them, either contender, non-contender. But I definitely think in that short kind of small window at the top, they're definitely the most interesting team, because even with the doubters like me, they have still won 5 straight. They did get that signature win against North Carolina. So I think, to me, they're the most interesting. I think that probably, if I had to wager money right now, just kind of eyeballing the schedule, I actually think it's probably Florida State that's probably going to feel pretty good. I mean, because of the fact that they're Florida State, they aren't a marquee game, and for TV purposes, they're not getting the home and homes with all these big name schools the way that North Carolina still has to play Virginia twice. Duke still plays Virginia. Duke and Carolina still play Virginia. Florida State just has a much more manageable schedule down the stretch. Again, I haven't diagnosed everybody's schedule, head to head and how it all matches up, but just eyeballing it, it looks like they have kind of a much more manageable schedule. Pitt, BC, Clemson in the mix. Those are 3 of, as we said, there's never an easy night in the ACC, but those are 3 of the quote unquote worst teams in the conference. So, as weird as it sounds, I wouldn't be surprised if that first, Friday of the ACC tournament or whatever it is, we're talking about Florida State as the number 1 seed, just because I think they benefit from a kind of a softer schedule down the stretch than the rest of the competition.
Yeah, I think that in terms of team quality, just purely team quality, they probably have the easiest run. They have Pitt, Boston College, Clemson, Duke, Miami. That's just not a difficult ACC run at the very least. What I will say is they have 3 road games, and this team has been pretty susceptible to losing on the road this year. I believe there's something like 1-4, 2-4 in the ACC on the road so far. I'm a little bit worried about them. North Carolina's schedule is wild. They have, a road game against NC State, who has proven to be this year's Jekyll and Hyde team, and most of the time it's the bad side of that, just because they don't play with effort. But when they do decide to play, like they showed against Duke, I mean, this is a team that can get it done, and that's a rivalry game, and you never know what's going to happen. Then they get Virginia, Louisville, Pitt on the road, Virginia again on the road, and that close with Duke. I don't think that they're going to survive that schedule without 2 losses, maybe even 3 if it comes down to it. I don't hate what Louisville has either. Louisville's got Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Syracuse, Wake, and Notre Dame with 3 of 5 at home. I think that's maybe the best, easiest run. We're gonna find out though if Duke is the team, because if Duke beats Virginia tomorrow, I think all bets are off. They really might make a run to the ACC title. Yeah, and the thing that I think is worth noting on Duke is that despite all of the kind of pseudo criticism I just gave them, I do think it's important. I think most fans understand, they dealt with a lot of crap this year. And, this is by far the most continuity that they've had as far as healthy players not being suspended. I think the last time you and I talked was, the night for Grayson Allen. We taped, and then he was suspended the next morning. But the point being is that you add that in with the Coach K stuff, and, as critical as many of us are, myself included, that's a lot to deal with, especially when you're trying to integrate 4 really highly touted freshmen in and have them kind of figure out their roles. And so I'm on board with you. I think that Virginia game is going to show a ton, and I don't know the exact numbers, over the last couple of years since Tony Bennett's really got it rolling, but kind of in the same way that Virginia seems to have Louisville's number, I feel like Duke, I could be totally wrong on this, but I'm visualizing Tyus Jones and Jahlil Okafor
going into Virginia and having this wild comeback. And so I don't know if that's totally off base, but I feel like Duke matches up pretty well with Virginia. But I do agree that if they can get that win tomorrow, we're taping, I guess, Tuesday on Wednesday. So if they can get that win tomorrow, I'm totally with you, and I'm going to have to kind of flip the script and kind of eat a little crow here because they're finally kind of have their pieces together. They looked great against Carolina, and if they get that win tomorrow, I think that is a major, major kind of step in the right direction, just in terms of the bigger picture in March, which is ultimately all that matters.
Yeah, kind of going toward what you said about Virginia Duke. Duke has won each of the last 2 years. In 2014, they split. With Virginia winning the ACC title game against Duke that season. So I'm at least interested in this matchup. I don't know the way it's going to go because this Virginia team is kind of interesting and very strong defensively and has all these long athletes who can really do a lot defensively. And I think it's going to come down to Duke needs to get something from the front court in that game. If they get something from the front court, they're going to be fine. If you had to pick one winner in the ACC right now, who wins the league?
Regular season or postseason?
Regular season. And the fact that let's go on this tangent real quick. The fact that the ACC does not recognize regular season championships is the most fucking bullshit thing that I have ever heard in my life. Like, whatever. Just get off your high horse. Like, give the team a regular season championship like every other league.
Yeah, I can't say that I have as adamant or strong an opinion as you do, but it does seem kind of ridiculous because the conference tournament by nature, and by the way, I'm one of those people that loves conference tournaments. Like, it's probably my favorite week of the year, maybe even more so than the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. I love conference tournaments, but they're totally arbitrary. I'm not saying that teams are actively trying to lose those games, but we all know that certain coaches value that thing much more than others, and there are plenty of coaches that don't mind losing on Friday and getting out of town and getting a couple extra days rest to prepare for the big dance. So, I am with you on that. In terms of, the regular season conference champ, dude, I think you just talked me into Louisville. I just think I think they're going to take an L here pretty soon because I just think that they're just kind of playing with fire a little bit. They're building these big leads. They're just a weird team. They're just inconsistent. But I think that once they get whatever happens there, I think that the schedule is set up nicely where they can go on a little run to close the season. As you said, 3 of the last 5 are at home. Outside of that Carolina game, I don't know that anybody left on their schedule is playing particularly well. And they're another team, kind of like what I just said with Duke, is that they're starting to get the pieces together. They're starting to get more comfortable together, kind of as a collective group. I think you add in the skill that they have, the schedule that they have. It just kind of makes sense for them to win the conference, the regular season title, which is something that frankly, like I said, I think you just talked me into it. I don't even want to say I wouldn't have said that a week ago or a month ago. I literally did say it 5 minutes ago, so I think you talked me into it.
Yeah, Louisville would be my pick. I'm a fan of what they can do, and that leads into our next little thing here, the little game we're going to play to end the show. Jason McIntyre, your colleague over at Fox Sports, tweeted out a thing earlier today saying that he would take Kansas, UCLA, Arizona, and Duke. You get the field. Which side do you have to win the national title? That's an interesting one. We're gonna do we're gonna pick 4 each of that group, and we're gonna do that as well. But in terms of what Jason said, which one would you take?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. First of all, I just thought it was a great concept. Like, just pick 4 teams. Yeah. Do you take the field or do you take whatever? In the case of Jason's 4 teams specifically, I think I would probably have to take the field because I think that while we've just discussed Duke at length, and I am actually, I'm guessing a bigger fan of UCLA than you are because I think I know how you feel about UCLA. I think the 2 teams that are kind of just, I don't even know if the safest bet is the right word, but Gonzaga and Villanova just feel like really safe bets to me. And so to me, the idea that I get both of those teams, I don't know. I just feel confident. And then, of course, you throw in all the ancillary teams that aren't mentioned, the Oregons, the North Carolinas, the Kansas – or no, I guess he included Kansas.
Kentucky.
I don't know. I'm blanking on the fourth.
Yeah,
Kentucky's – yeah, it's funny. Kentucky's another one of those teams, man. It's funny. Somebody just asked me this morning. They were like, well, can Kentucky make the Final Four? I'm like, of course they can make the Final Four. I don't know that they will, but we've also seen Kentucky at this time of year be miserable and kind of get hot and make a run late. So to answer the question, I guess if the four teams are Kansas, UCLA, Arizona, and Duke, I'm going to take the field mainly based on the strength of Villanova and Gonzaga, but also those other teams that we mentioned, the Oregons, the Kentuckys, teams like that.
Yeah, I'm also going to take the field on Kansas, UCLA, Arizona, and Duke. UCLA, I think, is going to struggle to put 6 straight games together. Just because of the defense. The defense was tremendous against the Oregon schools this week in Westwood.
Yep.
Like, just absolutely unbelievable for their standard, especially in the second half against Oregon. I'm still not quite there yet, though, on them bringing that consistently night to night. Arizona, I think Sean Miller has wrung every last bit of talent and ability out of this team that he could, and I'm not sure that I kind of buy them as a national title hope until next year. Kansas and Duke, I think those are 2 very fair picks. Kansas would be on my list, and they will be whenever we go through it. Duke is a really good team and could get hotter than anyone coming down the stretch, depending on what ends up happening in their front court. So, yeah, I think those 2 teams are fair, but if you're essentially giving me, like, 2 of my top, maybe 8 teams, I guess, I'm still going to take the field instead of that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of it. So, am I going first here with my 4? You going first?
You go first on your 4.
All right. Since I know you love them, I'll start with my beloved UCLA Bruins.
Okay.
I just think I'll give you a quick little synopsis.
UCLA would be like in my top 10, like of teams that will.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm not throwing out like South Carolina or like Clemson here. I mean, I'm going with pretty safe bets, but so I'll just give you a quick spiel. So I like UCLA. I think right now you could probably make the case at this particular moment they are playing as well as anybody in the country. They have a huge test against USC this weekend. USC has beat them 4 times in a row, and I don't know based on that game if I will feel the same way a week from now, but we are taping at this exact moment. So I will go UCLA. I already said Gonzaga and Villanova. I just think that those are the 2 teams that I think both can lose in the tournament because anybody can lose in the tournament, but it's going to take another team's best effort. Like, it isn't like with those 2 teams, and I'm guessing you might agree, it's like you're not, it's not going to be one of those where you have where a Villanova just shoots 4 for 29 from 3 and their season's over. Like, they're not going to beat themselves. You're going to have to beat them, and I feel the exact same way about Gonzaga. So I kind of lump those 2 together. The 4th team, I'm hot and cold on. I would guess lukewarm on them right now is Oregon. I just think that when they are clicking, I said this on Twitter the other day, they're the best combination of athleticism and skill in the country. I think that there's a couple teams of Florida State that's hyper athletic and skilled, but not like Oregon. Not with a 6'11" guy that can shoot threes and all the variables that they have. So to me, those are my 4. UCLA, I would probably put at the far end at the 4. Oregon probably right there, and then Villanova and Gonzaga. Those are the 4 that if you're giving me them and saying one of these is going to win the national championship, I would feel pretty good about those 4.
Oh, man.
What do you got? You hate it, don't you?
Yeah, I don't like that one. I would probably take your 4. I think that you give me 2 consistent teams in Gonzaga, Villanova. You give me a high upside team in UCLA, and you give me Oregon, who would be my 5th team, actually. Yeah, I think that I would take those 2.
Yeah,
it's just, I think I would. That's good. That's a really good one. That's like like mine are like on the like far end of like, okay, I would do this like for sure. But like yours is like right in the middle of, man, that could go either way. Like that's a really, really good one.
Well, thank you. That's what I'm here for. And like I said, what makes this exercise fun, and one of the reasons that I think like guys like you and I love basketball in general, is because anything can happen to just change the conversation, right? I think you hit on Arizona earlier, and like that's an example of a team that they add really, really good pieces with Alonzo Trier coming back, and like you think like, oh, they're going to be better because they just added this awesome player, and it outside of that first game against UCLA, they haven't looked the same, and so. I just use Arizona as a broader example of if we did this list in a week from now, I don't know if I'd feel about the same way about those four teams. Oregon, I saw some things that I didn't love this weekend when they went to LA and they split, and I think whenever you can split against those two schools, in general, that's a pretty good thing, but I saw some things that I don't love. Maybe it was just an anomaly. Maybe they go back to Eugene this weekend, kick butt, and it's not an issue. Same kind of I feel the same about UCLA. A week from now, I could hate that pick, but right now, those are the four that you're holding a gun to my head and you're saying, you got these four of the field. I'm gonna, or these are your four, ride or die with them. Those are the four that I'm taking.
Yeah, I like that one. My four are Kansas, Gonzaga, Villanova, Louisville. So basically, my idea here was the two most consistent teams in the country, and like the two coaches that I really trust. And you can say what you want about Bill Self in the NCAA tournament. I trust that dude to coach his ass off whenever he's out there. That guy can get it done. Rick Pitino, same way. Great coach. And obviously these two teams are, Kansas is one of the 5 best teams in the country. Louisville, we can argue. You can have them in the top 10 maybe. But again, like they're a really good team. We've talked about them all show. I think that would be my 4. Kansas, Gonzaga, Villanova, Louisville.
Yeah, that's really tough because I think, as you said, Oregon was kind of your 5th team. I think Kansas would probably be my 5th team. Yeah. Obviously, we're on board with Villanova and Gonzaga. I got to be honest, I don't know if this makes for bad audio, bad radio, bad whatever. I think I got to roll with your squad too, with your 4. I really do, because you get those two super consistent teams, and the teams that are on the periphery, a UCLA can make a run. And Oregon can make a run. North Carolina can make a run. But there's nothing that we see at this specific moment that makes you feel like, oh man, like it is for sure a thing. It is going to happen. Like none of the teams outside of your 4, would I be shocked if they didn't make it out of the first weekend. Like even a North Carolina, even a Duke, even a UCLA, an Oregon. Like, you mean to tell me that Oregon, as great as they are, like can't have a bad night and lose an 81-78 game to some 7 seed or whatever? Of course they can. And so again, I think it makes for bad radio, but I think I like your 4, and I think I like it. I really do, and I like the strategy involved of the two most consistent teams and 2 really good coaches. By the way, for any Kansas fan listening, I am so on board with you on Bill Self. I mean, I think it's something I've heard your former colleague at CBS, Gary Parrish, say this, is like, it is an art to be a 1 or 2 seed every single year, and sometimes Kansas almost gets blamed for it because they overachieve so much in the regular season that it puts like an unfair burden on them. I love Bill Self. The stat came out yesterday, or with the West Virginia game, that he hasn't lost a home and home since his Tulsa days in the early 2000s. Yeah, like this guy's incredible, and I haven't done the deep dive with Bill Self, and I love Bill Self, so I'm so glad that I found a brother in arms here. But if you go back and look at some of his losses, and like some of them are inexcusable. A few years ago, he lost to Stanford with Andrew Wiggins. Like, that's inexcusable. We get it. But last year, you lose to Villanova in the Elite Eight, and it looks like this terrible loss at the time. You're the 1 seed. How does this happen? And then Villanova goes and wins the national championship. But nobody does the reverse history and saying, oh, maybe that loss wasn't that bad for Kansas. It's just that in the moment, Bill Self, here we go again. And then it's like, no, that guy actually knows what the hell he's doing, and he's pretty fucking awesome. And I'm pretty sure there's maybe 2 or 3 programs in the country that wouldn't trade their coach for him in a heartbeat. So I'm with you on board with Bill Self, and just in a broader sense, I love the group of 4 you put together. I can't pick holes in it, and I got to be honest. If I was taking that 4 of the field, I do think I would go with that 4.
Okay, I'm going to replace Villanova with North Carolina. If I gave you Kansas, Gonzaga, North Carolina, Louisville, what would your answer be?
Kansas, Gonzaga, North Carolina, Louisville. In that case, I actually probably would take the field. Because to me, like I said, with the North Carolina, so with Louisville, I think that you're probably a little bit higher on them than I am. Like I said earlier, yes, they're a national championship contender. I can see the scenario. I don't think that I necessarily think that they really are going to win 6 games. So to me, that's already a tough one right there. North Carolina, I don't know if inconsistent is the right word, but they just I don't know. I just haven't seen the team that I thought I was going to see the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I say that as a team that's, of course, currently in first place in the ACC. So because of that, if I get Villanova, and I get that high up, for Villanova, who I think we all love, there's nothing not to love with that team. Like, they have holes, but as you and I both discussed earlier, like, if they lose in the tournament, somebody is going to go beat them. They're not going to beat themselves. Like, I would be shocked. They're going to wrap up a 1 seed here. Like, I would be shocked if they didn't make the Elite Eight, right? Like once you get to the Elite Eight, all bets are off. You're playing in Arizona, Gonzaga, whoever it is. Like, but I would be shocked if they get to the Elite Eight. So, anyways, I get Villanova. I still like Oregon's upside. I still think UCLA can put it together, and I still think, as crazy as it sounds, I think Duke can put it together. So, I think if you give me Villanova and you replace them with North Carolina, I probably do have to take the field.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one for me because I really like Kansas. I really like Gonzaga. I really like Louisville. You're giving me 3 of 5 and then kind of tossing in a North Carolina, who I think is a bit of it's almost like a wild card depending on like what Joel Berry shows up. Like he's been so inconsistent recently that it's a little bit difficult for me. But I think in that case, I probably take the field, but it's tough for sure. Aaron, do you have anything else that you want to share with us on the show before we get out of here?
No, I think we touched on a lot. I mean, I will say I saw Gonzaga in person this weekend. I mean, I think your listeners are really smart basketball fans. They understand how good Gonzaga is, but I would encourage anybody. We just spent a lot of time talking about Gonzaga kind of in a broader sense without breaking them down. I would say really, really check them out because they're a really, really good team. And then other than that, man, like, it's just going to be a fun, couple weeks. I mean, I watch this sport every night, and even teams that I think are going to end up on the 6th line, the 7th, there are a lot of really good teams this year. I was watching that SMU-Cincinnati game the other day, and those are 2 awesome teams. We mentioned all the ACC teams. We mentioned all the Pac-12 teams. And I just think it's going to be a really, really fun tournament. So, no, other than that, I want people to really, appreciate Gonzaga and stop just talking smack for the sake of talking smack. And the fact that we're going to have an incredible tournament. No, I don't really have much to add. What about you, man? What's rattling around in your brain up there?
Man, I got nothing. I talked about Gonzaga with Reegs over at Barstool on Monday. So I hope that my listeners are well entrenched with how good Gonzaga is. They are fantastic. Aaron, tell the people where they can find your work.
Yeah, sure. Aaron _Torres on Twitter, AARON_TORRES. As you mentioned at the top, work for Fox, helping out whatever I can over there. So it's been a fun season. Just check me out on Twitter, as I said, Aaron _Torres, and just pumping out as much, as much writing as I can between now and, whatever it is, April 4th or whatever it is. It's good. I'm just fired up for this tournament. I just think this tournament's going to be incredible. But as always, I appreciate you having me, my man.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Android, whatever podcast app you have. I am sure we're there. We would appreciate some ratings, reviews, anything that you can give us. We would love it. And until next time, we will talk soon. Bye-bye.